Hello, YouTube. I am here with the famous Lee Strobel. He's here with me. Also, this is my first time doing like an in-person interview like this in my new office in this new space. So let me know if everything is sounding right. I can see what it looks like, so it looks to be okay, but let me know in the chat if it's sounding okay. You can hear both of us. I'm pretty sure it's going to be smooth, but I feel like I need to make that kind of caveat before we get started.
This is awesome. This is a cool setup.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
I'm really excited to be able to start doing more of these. And COVID was really the reason why I didn't start doing these earlier.
Yeah.
But the whole idea when we moved into this new home was to get a space that I could do these my sort of regular videos and Skype type interviews. But interviews like this, when you're in person, it's so different.
It is,
and you know that.
Yeah,
you know that
because
you have a background in all of this. So.
I've done so many books where I go out and I go on the road and I interview experts, scholars on various aspects of faith. And so for my new book, The Case for Heaven, that I just finished, because of COVID, I couldn't do. So I had to do one of them, at least I think two of them actually, by Skype.
Yep.
And one was somebody in England, so I probably wouldn't have gone all the way to England anyway. But they were pretty good to do it that way, but nothing's better than being with the person. Usually I'll spend a day with them, and so it goes beyond just the mere interview. There's a lot more that gets into the conversation.
That's a good point. Yeah, you can. It's just so much different.
Yeah.
I mean, we could talk about that for probably about an hour of how much different it is. But anyways, if you guys don't know, Lee Strobel, he wrote a very, would you call it famous? You have a movie, The Case for Christ. So tell me a little about your story for the audience. If you don't know who Lee Strobel is, he started out as an atheist, investigated the evidence, became a Christian, wrote a book about it, turned into a movie. Now he's got this series, and we'll talk about a little bit today.
Yeah.
The newest book in the series, The Case for Heaven. So just let the audience know a little about your background. Who you are.
My background's in journalism and law. I was a skeptic.
Law? How did I not know that it was in law?
Yeah, I was legal editor of the Chicago Tribune.
Okay.
And I went to Yale Law School to get a Master of Studies in Law degree, which is kind of an odd degree. It's for people that want to understand law and teach law, perhaps, and write about law, but don't want to practice law.
Okay.
So it's kind of a weird degree.
Yeah,
There's only about 5 people a year that get it, because most people want to cash in and be a lawyer.
Yeah.
I want to write books. So,
interesting.
So I took my journalism training, my legal training, and after my wife became a Christian, I spent 2 years investigating the evidence for the resurrection of Jesus and scientific evidence for God, philosophical arguments, and so forth, for about 1 year and 9 months, until I became convinced, when I reached kind of my verdict in this case, that Jesus is who he claimed to be, and came to faith in Christ at that time.
That's kind of similar to my story in one way, because I didn't start out as an atheist.
Yeah.
I even have a video where I talk about how I wish I used to be an atheist and then became a Christian, because I feel like that testimony is so cool. But in my case, when I heard about my brother becoming an atheist, it really sent me on a journey to discover, hey, is there any evidence for the truth of Christianity? He raised some really challenging objections that I wanted to see if there was any good responses to. But what I discovered was that there's a ridiculous amount of evidence for the truth of Christianity, and not just for the truth of Christianity in particular from history and everything, but also there's all of these philosophical arguments for the existence of God, and it's just amazing. And so that's part of the reason why I wanted to do this and get into it. Is that kind of the same motivation for you? Yeah,
I mean, after I came to faith, I thought I'd stay in journalism, and I did for a while. But ultimately felt called into more of a church setting. So I left journalism, took a 60% pay cut to join the staff of a church, and met my good friend Mark Middleberg, who's become my ministry partner all these years. And we did evangelism and apologetics in a local church setting for many years. And then ultimately moved to California. I was a teaching pastor with Rick Warren at Saddleback Church. And now I'm kind of following my grandkids around because my grandkids moved to Colorado. So, hey, let's move to Colorado. Then my grandkids moved to Houston. It's like, hey, let's move to Houston. So we're kind of stalking the grandkids. Wherever they go, we go.
That's funny. That's funny. Okay, so let's talk about this Case for Christ book. And I also want to ask you, as a journalist, what sort of methods or things did you learn as you were investigating becoming a journalist
Yeah.
that you then applied that maybe like the general public might not be aware of, some different things that you can do to better investigate the truth of something? Because these are obviously religious questions, in my opinion, they're the most important, but they're also just the biggest.
Yeah.
And so how do you, like, what are some tips into investigating these big questions?
Well, I think a lot of the techniques that I would use as a journalist, I did investigative stories. I broke a lot of the stories involving the Ford Pinto case, which you're probably too young to remember.
Way too young.
Yeah. Believe me, it was a big deal at the time.
Well, I want to know about it now.
Well, Ford had designed this car called the Pinto.
Okay.
It had one small problem. It would blow up when hit from behind in a lower moderate speed crash.
Goodness.
Yeah. And some 60 some odd people burned to death in Pintos. It probably would not have died if the car had not been designed the way it was. And they were ultimately charged with reckless homicide for the deaths of 3 young girls in a Pinto.
Only 3?
In that case.
Okay.
And so they were charged with killing them with homicide. First time a corporation like that had been charged with reckless homicide. So for the Chicago Tribune, I covered the case, and I uncovered a bunch of secret Ford Motor Company memos that showed that they knew in advance the car's tendency to explode when hit from behind, but they didn't want to fix it because it was too expensive. So anyway, I broke a lot of those stories way back when. So yeah, I did a lot of investigative stuff that way, stories about innocent people convicted of crimes, things like that. And so I think some of the techniques are pretty commonsensical. You want to look at reliable sources. You want to keep an open mind. You want to follow the evidence wherever it takes you, because sometimes it takes you on very unexpected twists and turns.
Or somewhere you don't want to believe.
Or something you don't, a path you didn't want to go.
Yeah.
And so, when I began my investigation into the evidence, I said that I was going to be like an umpire in a baseball game. I was going to call a ball and a strike a strike. My hope was I could disprove Christianity and rescue my wife from this cult that she got involved in. But I wasn't going to twist the facts. I really wanted to know, where does the evidence point? And I think keeping that kind of open mind, as a juror would, is important. I think you can use the motif of a trial. Obviously, you can't force that metaphor too much. But you want to look at the evidence. You want to cross-examine that evidence and subject it to scrutiny and to investigation. You want to check your sources and find out, are they credible? Do they have are they in a position to be able to report accurately what they're claiming to have known, and so forth? So I think there's a variety of things you can do. And, I was shocked after a year and 9 months of, as you say, the amount of evidence. I call it the avalanche of evidence that pointed so powerfully toward the truth of Christianity. And I actually came to a place where I concluded it would have taken more faith to maintain my atheism than to become a Christian. The scales just sort of tipped for me.
Yeah. I think one of the biggest mistakes that a lot of people make is that in religion, we kind of assume that there's no experts.
Yeah.
Like, when it comes to religion, it's sort of everybody is an expert. Everybody has their own experiences. So everybody can give their opinion, and everybody's opinion is equally valid and equally weighty.
Right.
And I think that's a huge mistake, in the same way that it's a mistake to assume that everyone's opinion about quantum mechanics or, virtually any other topic, we recognize that there are experts in that field.
Yeah, and this is what I did at the Chicago Tribune. When I would do an article, when I would do an investigation, you would seek out the most reliable, trustworthy sources to quote and to ask for information from. I remember when I was doing my investigation, I was used to this as a reporter. So I'd pick up the phone. I remember calling a guy he was at a secular university. He happened to be an expert on Ignatius.
Okay.
Who was an early church father. And he supposedly wrote 7 letters on his way to being executed that report certain things about the resurrection and so forth. And I wanted to know if those were reliable, and because there's some dispute about some of them. So I just picked up the phone, and I admit I was a little bit deceptive. I would say, "Hi, I'm Lee Strobel from the Chicago Tribune. Doing some checking on some things, wonder if I could ask you some questions." They probably assumed that I was working on an article. I was just asking for my own information. I know I wasn't a Christian at the time, so I wouldn't do that today. But so that's what I did for a living, investigate stuff. So it was it was comfortable for me to be able to do that sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it really bothers me that people make that assumption about, and that's part of the reason why I do what I do, is that, and you know this about my channel, is that I interview the experts.
Yeah.
And I recognize that there's experts on even the various arguments for God's existence,
Right.
and not just on the theistic side, but also on the atheistic
Right.
side. And so when I try to do a dialogue or set up a dialogue between two people, I find two experts.
Yeah.
I don't turn to the YouTubers who are,
Right.
those people are, I'm sure that they've got great intentions, doesn't matter who you are. I mean, I'm a YouTuber myself, okay? So what I'm trying to explain is that what I do as a YouTuber, as a non-expert, is that I turn to the experts. And so I think that's just an awesome tip.
So I'm not a scholar. I'm not a biblical scholar. That's not my background. I'm trained in journalism and law. But I'm an investigator. I check things out. So I do what you do. I try to look at both sides, talk to people. Like, for instance, for my book, The Case for Miracles, where I tried to determine, are there credible reports of miracles today? I went and I interviewed the #1 skeptic in America, Michael Sherman, the Shermer, the editor of Skeptic Magazine, founder of Skeptic Magazine. And I gave him 3 chapters at the beginning of my book. I said, make your case against miracles and give me your best shot. I wanted to hear it. I wanted to see, could I then take that and test it and see whether it stood up to scrutiny.
Yeah, I was, in preparation for this interview, I listened to a talk that you gave on miracles.
Oh, yeah?
And it was, I mean, I had heard some of the same information before, but it was hearing every time. Okay, let me just say this, what I'm trying to get to.
Yeah.
The clip that you played of the pastor who then like gets his voice halfway through this recording. Every time I hear that, which I think when I listened to it earlier today, it's probably the 3rd or 4th time that I've heard it.
Yeah.
But every time I hear it, I'm like, this is insane. This is crazy.
Yeah.
I wish I could play it right now for everyone.
Yeah.
But why don't you tell me just a
I'm
little
going
bit.
to play it at your conference.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, we'll talk about the conference a little bit later. But tell me about, so then maybe tell me about another sort of lesser known miracle that when you were investigating for your book on miracles. Because you talk about the one of the lady who was healed of
multiple sclerosis.
Right. And then the one with the pastor. What's one that you may not use typically in a talk, but is nevertheless really evidentially important?
For me, there's some that have come out in recent months. For instance, there was a woman, it's not in my book because it happened after my book was published, but a peer-reviewed medical journal published a case study of a woman who had been blind. She used a cane to walk. She read Braille. She went to a school for the blind. She had a disease called macular degeneration, juvenile macular degeneration, which is incurable.
How old was she?
At the time this happened, I'm not actually sure.
Okay.
But she'd been blind for, and my recollection is 17 years or something like that. And she married a pastor, a Southern Baptist pastor. And one day they're getting ready for bed, and he just puts his hands on her and prays and says, God, I know that you can heal my wife. And I pray that you would right now. You have the power to do it, and I pray that you would bring back her sight. She opens her eyes, and she has perfect vision. And that's been a number of years since that has happened. So this wasn't like a fluke or that went away. But now.
So now her eyesight is back.
Her eyesight is back. And you go, okay, so how do you explain that?
Yeah.
How do you explain the timing of it coming immediately after a prayer to God for that kind of healing?
So that's a really important part. Is the timing.
The timing. Now, you have an incurable condition. This is the only case, I believe, that's been in a medical journal of an instantaneous healing of this particular illness. There's another similar case that is also reported in the medical literature about a man who was healed of a gastroparesis, I believe it's called, where he had, since his infancy, tubes inserted into his stomach. And he went for prayer, and hands were laid on him. He was prayed for. He felt like an electric shock go through his body, and he was healed of an illness that there is no medical record of anybody ever being healed of. The tubes have been removed, and he's been healed for I think well over a decade now. So, but it's a timing thing on those. But here's the thing to me is I heard about a woman with a PhD from Harvard who had done her own research in Mozambique, where there was a cluster of miracles that had taken place. And they sent a research team there to investigate this. And they would get all the people who are blind or deaf or hard of severe hearing or visual problems to come out from these villages. They would test them scientifically to determine their level of hearing or vision. They were then prayed for immediately in the name of Jesus for healing, and then they were immediately measured again scientifically. Was there any change? And in virtually every case, there was improvement. In fact, the average was a tenfold improvement in visual acuity. One woman was so deaf that when they first encountered her, she couldn't hear a jackhammer next to her. After prayer in the name of Jesus, she can now hear normal conversations. So now this team says, what do we do with this? Can we replicate this? So they go to Brazil, where miracles are breaking out. And they do the same test, and they get the same results. Now, this was published in the Southern Medical Journal, which is a secular, scientific, well-respected, peer-reviewed medical journal. And I went to Indiana University, where this professor teaches, and said, what's your explanation? She said, something's going on. Scientifically, she couldn't say it is a miracle.
What's her background? Is she agnostic, atheist, Christian?
She's a Christian.
Okay.
Yeah, but she teaches in a secular university. Her PhD is from Harvard. But she, in doing this research, said, look, this is not emotionalism. It's not people, with some sort of emotional situation. It's not a pastor trying to get people to send money in, I'll heal you. And so she rules out all these things and says, what's left? Well, professionally and scientifically, she can't say it is a miracle.
Yeah.
But she can say something is going on. And that to me is persuasive. I think that's powerful, that there is something going on. And I think it's reasonable to define it as being a miracle.
Yeah, when I think about miracles, and we've been talking about miracles for a little bit, so we'll just continue that.
Yeah.
I'm looking for my phone because I've got some slides and stuff I can pull up on the screen. So on the topic of miracles, in my opinion, the thing that really persuades me are the individual cases.
Yeah.
It's like the case of the woman with the multiple sclerosis.
Yes, and I interviewed her. She was diagnosed at the Mayo Clinic. She was, as two doctors have written books about her in books because they were so amazed by what took place. I went and investigated personally her story. It's absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah, and the doctors wrote books about it themselves because they were just like, this is nuts.
They said this, as one of them said, I've never seen in all my years of practice a clear miracle like this before.
Yeah. What was so crazy about it was the fact that her feet were shriveled, or were they extended out? Or something?
She was rigid. She was dying.
Rigid.
She had a tube in her throat so she could breathe. Her one lung was deflated. The other was at 50%. Her fingers were touching her wrists. Her feet were extended, and she couldn't even wear slippers. She's in bed. She's waiting to die. She's in hospice. She's waiting to die, and 450 people began to pray for her. We documented that because that's how many people wrote letters to her at the time saying, I'm praying for you, because it was announced on the radio that she was dying, and people began to pray. And on Pentecost Sunday, as these letters, some of them were being read to her by some of her friends, she heard the voice of God saying, get up, my child, and walk. And she jumps out of bed, takes the tube out of her throat, jumps out of bed. The funny thing she told me, she said, Lee, when I jumped out of bed, the first thing I noticed was my feet were flat on the floor. They were back to normal. And then the second thing I noticed was my hands had unfolded and were back to normal. And then she said the third thing I noticed was my eyesight was back, because she was virtually blind. All she could see was gray shapes. Now she could see again. And she said, you would think that'd be the first thing I noticed, but it was the third thing I noticed. And she was totally, completely healed, to the degree to which the muscle tone in her legs came. She hadn't walked in 7 years.
Atrophy.
Yeah, her legs had atrophied. Her father came in and began to waltz around the room with her. The next day when she went to the doctor saw her coming down the corridor and said, oh, she must have died and this is a ghost. Because, I mean, there's no way this happens.
That is more probable in his mind, a ghost, as opposed to a healing, a miracle.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, these cases are just, they blow my mind. In your book, you've got other cases and everything.
Yeah.
And also the part on Shermer, I think that's good to include.
Yeah, it is. I think it's good to say what's your best shot, what's your case against, and he cited some things that I just don't think are persuasive.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, why don't we talk about, because we mentioned earlier how you're going to play this clip at our conference.
Yes.
So why don't I go ahead and, of course, my phone doesn't want to pull it up now.
Oh, come on.
Here it is. Here it is. Okay, so we've got a conference coming up. This is the camera. It's hard to see everything with all these lights. Yeah. We've got a conference coming up, CCv1. Lee Strobel is going to be one of the speakers. He'll be speaking on Saturday. And yeah, we'd love to have you out there. What I'm announcing right now about this conference is that COVID restrictions have been lifted, which is really cool because of all the vaccinations that have been available in the U.S. and everything. I think a lot of, or most of, Americans are vaccinated at this point. I don't know.
Quite a few.
But the good point is that COVID restrictions have been lifted, which means that we now have 200 more tickets that have been added to the website. So we were actually nearly sold out, but now we have 200 more tickets. If you're interested in coming and seeing everyone in person, all the speakers that I mentioned, I'll put them up one more time. Josh Rasmussen, great friend of mine. Luke Barnes, he's one of the only people that won't be there in person because of COVID stuff. He'll be sending his in. Cy Gart, he's a retired microbiologist. He is incredible. You're going to love him. Lee Strobel obviously will be there. Liz Jackson, Trent Horn, Alex O'Connor, a.k.a. Cosmic Skeptic. He's got 450,000 subscribers, one of the biggest atheists on YouTube right now. He will be debating Braxton Hunter on the existence of God. And I've been talking with Braxton a lot about this debate. It's going to be incredible. It's going to be amazing. So hope to see you guys there. Links, if you want to attend the conference, are in the description of the video. Okay,
now I tweeted about the conference, and I got somebody commented and said, "You lost me when you said August in Houston."
Oh my goodness!
And you know, my attitude is, hey, we got this invention now called air conditioning, and it's gonna be fine.
Lee, it doesn't matter because you go outside and you know this for 10 seconds, just walking from the church to your car, drenched. Drenched. It doesn't matter.
I know, but you know, we'll be in comfort during the conference.
True.
And
we'll probably be cold, actually.
You'll probably be cold, and it's definitely worth people's time to come. I think that debate, Braxton Hunter's awesome.
The debate's going to be incredible.
That should be fun. And I'm going to talk on miracles. I'm going to, here's my guarantee. If you come and you hear my talk, you will experience a miracle. Seriously. If you come, you will experience a miracle. And you will be able to say the rest of your life, I witnessed a miracle of God. There's my guarantee.
There's your guarantee. All right. See you guys at the conference. Okay, so let's now turn and talk about your newest book. Your book on heaven.
Yeah.
So tell me about
that. It's called the Advanced Reader's Copy. It's one they do for the press and stuff. But
super fancy stuff.
It's called.
Let me see if I can
Heaven.
hold it up to the camera. See if people can see. Actually, it's too dark there. There you go. Well, this is the advanced copy.
Yeah, it's going to be a hardbound copy. Hardbound. There's audio pages that'll be available.
Cool.
As well, and a student edition, and a small group curriculum, video curriculum, where I teach the material and so forth.
So tell me why. What's the process of going from the case for Christ to the case for miracles? And what about the case for faith? Where does that
I did the case for Christ, which is the historical evidence for Jesus being the unique Son of God. I did a follow-up called In Defense of Jesus. It kind of goes deeper on those issues. I did a book called The Case for Faith, which I'm redoing and will come out next fall, which deals with the 8 top objections to Christianity.
Okay.
I did The Case for Creator, which looks at scientific evidence for God. I did The Case for Grace, which looks at the power of God to transform lives. I looked at The Case for Miracles, which is is God still involved in the miracle business today? And then The Case for Heaven. And that was precipitated because
I'm interested in the order. How did the order come about? Did it just seem natural to talk about the objections and then?
Yeah, it seemed natural. First, establish the case, look at objections, and then look at some of the things like miracles that are and the afterlife, heaven and hell. It seemed like a logical progression of some sort.
Okay. And now we're on heaven.
Now we're on heaven and hell. I have 2 chapters on hell. I deal with annihilationism. I deal with universalism. I deal with reincarnation. So it's a book that looks at what is the evidence we have that there is an afterlife and heaven as the Bible describes it. What about hell and so forth. And it started because I almost died about 10 years ago.
Really?
Yeah, my wife found me unconscious. I was taken by ambulance to the hospital. I remember waking up in the emergency room, and the doctor looked down at me and he said, "You're 1 step away from a coma, 2 steps away from dying." And then I went unconscious again. And I was on the edge of death for several days and in the hospital for about 10 days. And I had a very odd condition called hyponatremia, which is a precipitous drop in blood sodium levels. And we have a very narrow band in our body that blood sodium has to be maintained at. And if you're a doctor or a nurse, I'm going to give you my number, and it'll blow your mind. What my number was, 112. Now, any physician, when I tell a doctor that, they go, "Oh, you died, right?" Or, "Oh, you were in a coma, right?" I mean, you can't live at 112.
What's the normal?
Normal is more like 132. It's a pretty narrow band, and it doesn't take much, but you can't survive at 112. What saved my life was the fact that it had gone down very slowly, and my body had acclimated over a period of several weeks as it was going down. And what happens is your brain cells take in moisture and they expand. So my brain is expanding in my skull, and I was hallucinating. I was out of my.
Unfortunately, it didn't make you smarter.
No, it didn't. It made me much dumber. And so I obviously survived, but having survived almost dying like that, it just brought into sharp focus the question of what happens when we die. And obviously, as a Christian, I believe that when we die, there's an intermediate state where we go to be in the presence of God, and then ultimately the resurrected body will spend eternity in heaven. I know that theologically, but is there evidence for that outside, from science, from other things? So I decided to do this book, and what turned out to be unintended by me, but fortuitous, I believe, is COVID hit. And I say that because I was having lunch with Leslie, my wife, recently, and there was a young waitress. She was about, 19, 20, 21 years old, 18, somewhere in there. And I got talking to her, and she started to cry. And she said, "Oh, I'm sorry. She said, "I almost didn't come into work today. We just lost a close family member to COVID." And I thought, here's a young woman who probably never thought about death before. She's 18, 19 years old. What, you got their life ahead of you. And yet COVID has, because of the death of someone close to her, has brought this to her mind. So I think it's an important book today because of the world having gone through the throes of this pandemic, that people really, they want to know, and they ought to know, when they close their eyes for the last time in this world, what happens. And so I interviewed scientists. I interviewed a neuroscientist from Cambridge University, PhD, philosophers, theologians.
You went to the experts.
Yeah, that's right. I even have a chapter where I interviewed, before he died, Luis Palau.
I don't know who that is.
Oh my gosh. Luis Palau was the Billy Graham of South America.
Okay.
He was a tremendous evangelist who shared the gospel with 1 billion people in his life. He would do major festivals around the world where 100,000 people would come. It was like Billy Graham. In fact, he was mentored by Billy Graham. And he traveled the world for decades and preached the gospel. Great guy, born in Argentina. And he was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer, and he was dying. And so I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to talk to someone who knows they're about to die? What's their attitude toward death, especially as a believer that he is? And so I went out to Portland, Oregon, where he lives, and I spent the day with him. And it was one of the most profound experiences in my life to speak to this great man of God.
Do you have a chapter of that?
I do. I have a whole chapter in the book where I recount that conversation with him.
Wow.
And it was so, and I'll never forget, one of the last things he said to me was, "Lee, when it's all said and done, when you get to the end, you will never regret being courageous for Christ." I thought that's pretty powerful. That's pretty powerful.
Yeah, I feel like we need to end the interview.
I know.
On that point.
He's just a tremendous guy. And I asked him, by the way, I said, if you could, when you get to heaven, I said, if you could write a note back to me, what would it say? If you could write a note back to the
weird question.
Yeah, to the church, if you could write to the church, not just to Lee, but to the church, what would you say? And he thought, and he said, I think it would say, go for it. Go for it. Tell people the gospel of Jesus. It's up to them how they respond. That's not your responsibility. It's between them and God. But take a risk. Share it with a friend. Share it with a colleague. Share it with a family member. But, go for it. I thought that was real. And then I asked him, what would you say to non-believers? Someone who's not a Christian. And he looked at me and said, I would say, don't be stupid. And we laughed. I said, I can't believe I came all the way out to Portland, Oregon, interview one of the great evangelists of history, and he tells me, don't be stupid. But he meant it in a winsome way,
Yeah.
Do what I did and you've done and many others done. Check out the evidence yourself. Reach your own conclusion, but don't ignore it.
See, I think that might be somewhat related to Pascal's wager.
Yeah,
and
a little bit.
Liz Jackson, who's going to be at the conference.
Yeah.
She is like one of the leading experts on Pascal's wager. She's got a new version of it. It's really, really cool.
That's
really,
awesome.
it's really, really powerful too.
That's awesome.
So, okay.
By the way, one thing I'll mention too is there's a movie being made on the book, Case for Heaven. It'll be in movie theaters, I believe, next March.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, it's a documentary, so it's not a feature film
Okay.
like The Case for Christ. But the Luis Paul story will be in there. He actually died before we were able to put him on camera.
Okay.
But I have the audio of it. So we're using clips of the actual audio before he died, talking about the future in
Is it
heaven.
the same people that produced the...
They're related, not the exact same people. But,
Okay.
And one of the things Luis gave me, I wish I brought it and we could show it, but before he died, he gave me, I'm gonna tear up, he gave me his preaching notes, handwritten, on a message he gave on heaven. And I'm having them framed in my office. But these are the handwritten preaching notes of one of the great evangelists of history. Color-coded, he actually preached from these notes. And he said, I want you to have them. And I took one, it was three or four pages. I gave one page to my friend Mark Middleberg, and he has it framed. And I have a page that I'm framing. And but anyway, I think that interview is worth the book.
Yeah. Well, so one of the questions I've got is, can you give me any details of, like, you mentioned at one point the science behind heaven.
Yeah.
So can you give me a taste of maybe something that you
I
found
look
or
at
discovered?
neuroscience. I interviewed Sharon Dirks, who is a PhD from Cambridge and a brain scientist, on the question of do we have a soul? Are we just a brain, or is there another dimension, our consciousness? Because the traditional Christian teaching seems to be that when we die, our body and our soul separate, and our soul goes to be in the presence of God until the final resurrection. And do we have a soul? And I think she makes a very persuasive case that that we do possess a soul that can survive after death. And then I looked at the question of near-death experiences. Can they tell us something about whether we do survive when we're clinically dead?
Did you interview anyone on that specific
I did. I
section?
interviewed a guy who's researched 1,000 near-death experience cases, John Burke.
Okay.
And he happens to be an old friend of mine. We were ministers together at a church. And John spent many years researching these issues. He wrote a New York Times best-selling book on the topic. And so I take a very conservative approach to this. I say, you know what? I'm only going to believe those things I can corroborate. So if you tell me you died and met Jesus, and by the way, he's 6'2" and he has blue eyes or whatever, it's like, yeah. There's no way I can corroborate that. But if you tell me, and your medical records show that you were dead, I'll give you an example. A woman had a brain aneurysm. She was bleeding in her brain. They had to do a very unusual brain surgery on her. So they cooled her body to 50 degrees.
Wow.
They stopped her heart. They drained the blood from her skull. 3 tests showed 0 brain activity. The blood was gone from her brain. And they did this brain surgery. Well, when they're done, she talks about how she was conscious the whole time. So what do you mean you were conscious? Well, she was able to describe the highly unusual instruments that were used in her surgery.
Was she, where was she? Was she on the table?
She was on the table. She had patches over her eyes. She had a device put in each ear that was at 100 decibels of sound in her ears. So, and yet, she says she floated out of her body. She witnessed the brain surgery. She was able to describe these highly unusual instruments. She would have no way of knowing what they look like apart from that. And she described the conversation in the room and how the nurse said, we got a problem. Her arteries are too small. And the other doctor said, well, try the other side. She was recalling specific conversations in that room, even though her brain was flatlined.
Mm-hmm. Had no blood in it.
She was clinically dead. How do you explain that? To me, that's evidence that there is a consciousness that is separate from, and I don't want to say separate, I want to say related to, connected to, but the brain, the physical brain, that there is a consciousness that can survive clinical death. And then I cite in my book, golly, I don't know, a dozen examples of things that people experienced even though they were dead. And there's over, I'm trying to remember offhand, but I think there were 50 cases that were investigated where there were 0 brain waves, and yet people were fully conscious. So I look at things where people are able to tell us things that they otherwise could not have known.
I've heard cases of where like someone goes up and like reads a number on the top of some like instrument.
Exactly. There's one case. There's a case where a woman separates from her body. Her consciousness goes up. She sees the top of the fan in the hospital room. She's watching them resuscitate her, and she returns to her body, and she said, by the way, on the top side of that fan blade, there's a red sticker. And they go up, and sure enough, there's a red sticker on the other side. The famous case involves a tennis shoe that a woman floated through the floors of the hospital to the roof of the hospital and comes back, and then she says, by the way, on the 3rd floor roof, or whatever it was, 4th floor, whatever it was, the roof, there's a tennis shoe. And she describes the color, she describes how the lace is folded under the heel of the tennis shoe. It's a man's shoe, it's left-footed or whatever it was.
This is blowing my mind.
Yeah, and sure enough, they go up and they find it. So there are cases, there are over 30 cases where people who are blind can see during that time when they're conscious.
Oh, that's even more interesting.
Yes, that's even more interesting.
Oh my gosh.
So, and not only that, they did a study and they found that 92% of people who have these near-death experiences separated from their body, who can observe verifiable things, 92% of their observations are completely, totally accurate. Another 6% were mostly accurate, partly accurate. So you got 98% of them are telling you things that they could not have otherwise known, they're corroborative with great accuracy. And so my objection was, oh, wait a second. People say they separate from their body and they watch the resuscitation efforts. I can imagine what that would be. They would try to do the heart thing, and they would do, so I could make that up, or I could guess. Well, they tested that. And what they found is that when people...
What do you mean they tested that?
Okay, well, they took people who claimed that they witnessed the resuscitation. They said, describe it for us. They did. It was incredibly accurate. Then they went to people and they say, what would you imagine it would take place? How would you describe it if you were to imagine what... And people would say, and totally wrong. Totally wrong. So I'm telling you, I think the
way so by resuscitation you mean like the person who's in the room,
yes,
being resuscitated,
right, separates from their body and is watching the resuscitation.
All efforts. The different people doing the different things.
That's right.
And explains sort of what happens throughout
the sequence. Exactly. Then
the other people who weren't there, they go and ask them.
They're just
what happened.
Yeah. What's your best guess?
Yeah.
So they're trying to say, well, if I tried to guess, I would say, well, they did a heart massage thing, and a doctor did this, and they, it'd be totally wrong.
And those were totally wrong.
Yeah. So yeah, I think I think there's good evidence. We have a soul. I think there's good evidence through near-death experiences that our soul can survive at least our clinical death.
I also want to make a point that evidence from like near-death experiences, that is completely distinct from the philosophical arguments.
That's right.
For dualism or for,
It's exactly right. It's not a philosophical argument. It is a scientific argument.
Yeah.
And again, I take a very conservative view. My view is I'm only going to believe that which I can corroborate through these verifiable experiences that a person could have that cannot be explained apart from the consciousness continuing after their clinical death. And so I conclude that near-death experiences tell us that we do survive clinical death to some degree. I don't know how, I can't prove how long, but I believe to some degree. And my book also looks at all the objections to near-death experiences and answers those. And
what about like not the mind-body problem, but the dependency of the mind on the body? So if like you hurt the brain, then
the problem is I was talking to this neuroscientist. She does brain imaging. She says, I can see if if I stimulate you in certain ways, I can see regions of your brain light up, so to speak. We can do that, but I can't see your thoughts. The content of you, I cannot see. I cannot test. I cannot quantify. So she said, here's a mind game. Imagine there's a woman named Mary. And Mary is a scientist who knows everything about the human eye. She's a genius. She understands exactly what happens to the optic nerve, when all the stuff, all the chemical reactions that take place. She has it down. She understands it. And by the way, Mary is blind. What if Mary all of a sudden got her eyesight back? Would she know anything new at that point? Yeah, I think she would.
Yeah.
What does that tell us? I think it tells us there is something beyond just the physical processes of the brain. There's something beyond that. She would have information that does not fall in. Yeah, that first person experience. Exactly. That's what consciousness is.
Yeah.
Naturalism has no explanation for how that can originate. Christianity says if we're made in the image of God, who is a disembodied mind, then of course we would have a reflection of that, which would be human consciousness.
Another way of putting it is that if the foundation is conscious, then it's not so surprising that we don't have other beings that were also conscious. If the foundation is that way, if the foundation is mind-like, then it's not surprising to find mind-like creatures.
Exactly right. Exactly right. So that's just the beginning of the book where I deal with this, but I build a case from there. And so I'm pretty excited about it. I hope it was fun. We sent it out for some reactions from scholars and from various people, authors and people in popular culture, to get responses to the book. And we've gotten some we sent to theologians and scientists and so forth, and have gotten some really good comments back. One person said, I'm not even going to quote it because it's just over the top, but it was very enthusiastic. It'd be embarrassing coming from me, but we're very excited about this book. And my hope is that in a world where I lost my brother during the COVID crisis.
Was it due to COVID?
Yes, I believe it was. The flu. It was right as COVID was starting, and he had heart surgery. They put him in a nursing home, and he caught the flu. They didn't test him back then. This was at the beginning of it. We do know COVID was circulating in that area at that time.
I'm really sorry to hear that.
Yeah, thanks. But we all know somebody just about, don't we?
Yeah.
I mean, most people know someone. You probably know someone who died. And so I didn't intend this book to necessarily coincide with that, but I think in God's timing, it's coming out at a point where I think people need encouragement, and they need to know that there is hope. There is hope beyond the grave.
Well, speaking of something that people need to know about, I want to talk about your new center for apologetics that a lot of our listeners and watchers and subscribers don't know about it because it's so new.
It is.
So let's talk about that for a little while. And we're going to talk about this, but then I've got one last question I'm going to ask you.
Okay.
So stick around for that. It's going to be really spicy. So, all right. So
spicy.
Don't worry about it.
we start,
We have some materials here too.
Yeah, we do.
We can flash them around if we need to.
I've written a bunch of books, and I love books because they can circulate after you're dead and gone, and in China when you're asleep here, somebody's reading your book. It's great. But I wanted to leave a legacy beyond that, and I wanted to train a new generation of people to both share and defend the gospel in a winsome and an attractive and a powerful and an accurate way. And so I got together 36 PhDs from various disciplines. And we started what's called the Lee Strobel Center for Evangelism and Applied Apologetics.
It's linked in the description of this video, so if you just go down, you can actually just click the link and go check it out.
Okay, it's at Colorado Christian University. And we've created dozens of, I think 91 courses on the bachelor's and master's level.
Let me pull up my my slide on all the certificates too.
Wait on that for a second.
Okay.
Just to say, first of all, if you want a bachelor's degree in evangelism or apologetics or a master's degree, we already have hundreds of students going through the program. It's all online. Everything we do is online, so you can do it from home. But we, as I say, we had almost 40 PhDs create these courses. And then we drew from practitioners. For instance, in the area of small group evangelism, we drew on Gary Poole, who's the world's leading expert on doing small group evangelism. When it came to the role of evangelism in the local church, we had Mark Middleberg contribute. So I'm just very proud of what we've created. So then we thought, well, wait a minute. A lot of people are like me. I don't want another degree, but I might want to take a course and learn. And so we now created certificate level courses, which means these are courses anybody can take to grow and to learn.
So you don't have to necessarily get a bachelor's or a master's.
Exactly. You can take one course. And they're inexpensive. They're all online.
Let me go ahead and put this up here.
I put up the list of
courses. These are all of the different courses. It's kind of, the text is a little bit small, but you should be able to read it all.
I'll mention a couple.
Pause the video and mention a couple.
Yeah, Defending Jesus in a World of Religions, The Case for Christ in a Muslim Context, Biblical Truth Confronts Eastern Thought, Apologetics Essentials in World Missions, How to Share Your Faith Naturally, How to Build a Highly Evangelistic Church, Leadership in Evangelism, Small Group Evangelism, Historical Evidence for Christianity, Answering Key Questions and Objections to Christianity, Science in the Bible. Melissa Travis, who's a PhD in Science and Faith, has written a book on that. She was our consultant on that. Evidence for the Resurrection, a course on that. A course on C.S. Lewis. Here's a course you would be interested in. Film, Music, the Visual Arts, and Apologetics.
I think I actually did see that, and I was kind of interested.
Yeah.
What are you talking about over there, Lee?
Yeah. We should have drawn on your background. But so we're hoping that these will be launched probably in the month of June. They're all done. The courses are done.
Okay.
We're just on the launching phase.
Oh, wow. So it's coming up soon.
This is coming up very soon.
This is perfect timing because, I get emails from people, I think pretty much every day at this point. They're like, hey, I'm just getting into this. Yeah. I want to learn more about apologetics and everything. And this is a great place, I think, for people to go. Because it's not just that you're like putting together these courses to make money or anything like that. It's you've consulted these PhDs. Yeah. You're trying to create courses that are not only relevant, but then also accredited. Yeah. Are they accredited?
Yeah.
The bachelor's and the master's?
Bachelor's and masters are accredited. It was so cool. I met with a guy recently. He's in our master's program. And he's an older guy. And he's already got an MBA. And I said, what are you getting this master's degree for? And he said, I have a vision. I want to create a network of small group experiences for non-believers in the town in which I live. I want to have them all over town where a skeptic or someone who's just investigating faith can get together, have a small group experience where they can go through a journey to investigate Christianity. I think that's awesome. That is so awesome. I think we use the term applied apologetics. I think we invented that term. I don't know.
But, I like it.
Yeah, because it's what you do.
Yeah.
You're not just studying and sitting in an ivory tower someplace. You've got a YouTube presence. You're investigating faith. You're testing it and so forth. We want people who are going to put this to use. Who are going to do blogs. Who are going to do television shows, radio shows, podcasts, or just share it across a fence to a neighbor. We want to put it to use. And especially in the local church. Yeah. As we believe every local church needs an evangelism point leader and someone who can lead this effort of evangelism in the local church, but also bring in apologetics, which, as you know, in the 21st century is essential in helping people come to faith.
I feel like I need to apologize. These chairs my wife bought are so comfortable. I'm just like sitting back here listening to you. I don't know if it looks weird on camera, but they're so comfortable. Aren't they comfortable?
They are very comfortable. I like them. Yeah,
they're very comfortable.
Very cool.
Okay, so is there anything else that you'd like to say about the program? We've already mentioned, so if you'd like to learn more information.
Yeah, StrobelCenter.com.
There you go.
STROBEL Center, all one word. StrobelCenter.com. If you go there, it'll link you over to the Colorado Christian University site. And
are all the certificate programs already there? Can you see those now?
They're just now being posted, so it'll be shortly they'll come up.
Okay.
But there's a place there if you want to talk to somebody about the courses. We have scholarships available if somebody wants to get a degree.
Most of the people watching this video actually will be watching it in the future.
Yeah.
Past this time, so it'll already be available there anyways.
Yeah.
So if you're watching this live, maybe stick around a couple weeks, but you can immediately sign up for a bachelor's or a master's.
Oh yeah, we have students already going through the program.
Yeah.
So we're excited about it. We really believe that it's important in this generation, the 21st century, for people to not only share the gospel and communicate it winsomely and naturally, which we train people to do in a way that syncs up with their personality. I don't have to do it like you. You don't have to do it like me. But also be able to defend the faith and present reasons why we believe. I had a guy online I was reading recently. He said his kindergartner granddaughter was at a public school on the playground and was taunted by some other kids because she believes in God. The truth is that...
Taunted by other... Where is she living?
Right here in I don't know what town, but right here in the States. And, you know, the truth is our kids and our grandkids will be challenged in their faith. If they're believers, if they come to faith at a young age, as my grandchildren are now, one by one, thank God, but they're going to be challenged.
Yep.
And people are going to say, why do you believe in a fairy tale in the sky? And we need to be able to give answers. And the Bible tells us, 1 Peter 3:15, we're always to be prepared to give an answer to anyone who asks us to give the reason for the hope that we have and to do it gently and respectfully. So that's a command for every Christian. So we all ought to be ready. So, you know.
Okay, I have two questions now. Okay, the first question that I had, and I'll ask that second.
Yeah.
But the first question that I've got, because I heard you give a talk at Woodlands Church.
Yes.
And it was just on something general apologetics, or maybe it was like a question that someone asked. Mm-hmm. And I really, really liked your response to this. Mm. So can a Christian doubt, essentially? Is that something that's unbiblical? Are you sinning when you doubt? Yeah. What is your view on that? And the reason why I'm asking that is because you quoted a Bible verse about this, and I'm hoping you quote the same one or the same story. I may have to jog
my memory of it.
It was about, now I can't remember. Yeah. It was
there is a verse in Ecclesiastes that says something to the effect of be kind to those who doubt.
There's that, but then it was Jesus. Someone was doubting.
Oh yeah, I know this. Yeah, sure.
It's not Thomas.
No, I know the story.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, can we doubt as Christians? Mm. Yes, we can. And even Gary Habermas, a great expert on the resurrection, has written books on this. And one of the ways we know is John the Baptist.
There you go.
Yeah. If anybody should have known the identity of Jesus being the Son of God, it was John the Baptist. He pointed at Jesus and said, "Behold, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world." He said, "I have seen and I testify, this is the Son of God." So, I mean, he knew, but then he gets arrested. And interestingly, doubt usually comes in during times of stress or challenge. Mm-hmm. So now he's in prison, so now he's not so sure. Now he's hesitating. And maybe you could say he's even doubting. And so what does he do, though? Does he stew in that? And does he let that doubt kind of erode his soul? No. He gets a couple friends together, says, go track down Jesus and just ask him once and for all, are you the guy we've been waiting for? We're going to wait for somebody else. So they go track down Jesus, and they ask him, are you the guy we've been waiting for? You know John? Well, he got busted, and now he's got questions. So tell us once and for all. So how does Jesus respond? Does Jesus say, how dare he have the temerity to express a doubt about my identity? No. He says, quote, go back to John and tell him what you have seen and heard. The blind receive sight, the lame walk, those who have leprosy are cured, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the good news is preached to the poor. In other words, go back and tell about the evidence you've seen with your own eyes that convinces you that I am who I claim to be. So they go back, they tell John, but here's the deal. It's after this happens that Jesus gets up before a group and he says, among those born of women, there's no one greater than John. John, the guy who dared to ask a question.
Kind of doubted Jesus a little bit.
Yeah, it's okay for us to have questions. It's even okay for us to have doubts, as long as we do what John did and we pursue answers.
Yeah.
And, Cameron, as you know, today there are so many good resources out there. When you've got a question, when you've got a doubt. When I did my investigation as a skeptic back in, in about 1980, there was very little in popular literature about this stuff. No, it didn't have YouTube. And nowadays, my goodness, there's a proliferation of excellent material out there that can help anybody process the questions that they have. So I think it's healthier to have a faith that has been put to the test and found firm than an untested faith. I think. I think your faith, once you test it and find that it does stand up to scrutiny, it's a stronger faith. And now you're better equipped to be able to deal with that question when it comes up that somebody might ask you.
Well, I'm sorry I put you on the spot
about
John the Baptist.
I just
when it came to you, it clicked. So
yeah, I thought you were referring to, there's a verse in Ecclesiastes that says something about that God is merciful to those who doubt. I have to look that up though.
Yeah. Okay. So now for my spicy question, which is not spicy at all. The question is really simply this, and I'm really curious to see what your response is to it. How do you deal with criticism? Online.
Yeah.
How do you deal? Because I get a lot of criticism, obviously.
Sure.
And people ask me the same question, like, how do you deal with skeptics saying nasty things about you on Twitter and on YouTube and everything? How do you deal with someone who's critical of your work? What is your response? How do you deal with it emotionally, psychologically, and then also intellectually? How do you deal with criticism?
It's hard sometimes, be honest, because people can be cruel. I mean, they don't just say, "Hey, I disagree with your interpretation of such and such." They say, "You're a liar. You're trying to deceive people. You're out to make a buck." It's like, really? Okay. That's why I took a 60% pay cut to go into ministry. So does it sometimes affect you emotionally? Yeah, it can. I get a lot of quote unquote trolls, people who really don't have any interest in a rational conversation, but who just want to,
be nasty.
And so when it gets extreme, I pray for them, and then I block them. I always pray first, but then I do for some, because they're just you have to shake the dust off your sandals.
On Twitter, I just can't handle it a lot of times. Twitter is just. And a lot of people think that too. It's not like a religious thing.
Yeah.
It's just Twitter is not the kind of platform that promotes, I don't think, good dialogue, or doesn't get the best out of us.
It doesn't. Although I've had so many great experience on Twitter too, that I'm still I tweet half dozen times a day. I like Twitter. I agree with you though. It can be a wasteland in many ways. But I've had some really great conversations. And I remember getting an email once from a guy who was just ripping me, and I wanted to rip him back, but I didn't. And I thought, I'm going to reply in gentleness and respect. And I wrote him back and tried to get to the root of what was going on. And as it turns out, the guy was in real dire circumstances, and he had lost his job. He was living on public aid in a trailer, highly educated PhD, had physical issues that were made it impossible for him to work, and my heart went out to him. And once we connected on that level of two human beings, we were able to have a good conversation.
I love that, because that's something we can often forget, is that when we're talking with someone online, we forget that there's an actual person there.
Yeah.
Even when you're doing sort of argument on Facebook or anywhere, you just forget that there's a genuine person over on the other side. What I also find interesting about this story is that if you would have just gone in with intellectually, here's why you're wrong, here's my side of things, then you would have missed out on this entire. Like, are you friends with him now? Are you guys?
No, that's years ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, you would have missed out on this opportunity to still connect with him. At that time, in the way that you did, and it was at a much deeper, I think, more important level than it was just like sort of this, superficial fighting back and forth of the arguments, when really there's something deeper going on. And a lot of times we just don't recognize that, or we don't want to even think about the possibility that there maybe instead of getting in a big argument with somebody, slow down, think about be empathetic, be sympathetic, show some compassion on this person, and really love them.
Yeah, and I think we need to sift what they say and hold fast to that which is good and reject that which is not. So in other words, there may be some legitimate point that they're making.
Yeah.
That you go, golly, I made a mistake, or I can see your perspective, or maybe I should have phrased that differently, or whatever. So sometimes you say, there's a seed of truth in what you're saying, and I want to respect that and respond to that. So
here's a question that's related to that: is how much, because there are atheists who are making response videos to my content almost every day.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that they're just the same with you, probably even more so because of your platform.
Yeah.
So how much content do you actually go and watch?
That's a really interesting question, because what I wrestle with is I believe God's given me direction that I need to go, projects I need to do, like my bookcase for heaven that I just finished. And the question I always have to ask is, how much time do I need to take to go off and respond to some objection that is really half-cocked, or some guy who doesn't believe Jesus ever existed, and there's some whacked out stuff? Do I need to stop what I'm doing and reply to all that? And most of the time, no, I don't. I haven't got the time to do it. I don't even have an assistant. It's just me. I answer my own phone. I make my own plane reservation. That's just me. So
let me give you a tip, because I've actually got a team of guys that help me out.
And maybe that's what I need.
So,
my daughter does help me a little bit. She helps me book contracts for speaking engagements. So so I do have some help.
So I've got a Facebook group of about 7 to 8 people who will devote time to watch a response video that's been made to my work. They'll watch it, summarize it, and then let me know whether or not it's worth responding to.
Oh, that's interesting.
And in 5% of cases, it's worth a response.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, and so that way I don't have to wade through it myself, because
that's a very good idea. I may pursue that.
And I'm sure that there would be people who would love to do that for you.
That's a great idea. I like that idea.
Yeah, consider that.
Because when
and give them criteria.
Yeah.
That was one thing. They were like, okay, how do we know if you're going to be interested in giving a response to this? So I gave them a list of things that would be important.
Yeah.
If there's a good something that I missed, or if he raised a good objection that maybe could throw people off, stuff like that. And so
I think that's a great idea.
Could be something. And responses you don't never have to do responses. You can do a response every now and then.
Yeah.
To something that's worth doing.
And there have been a couple where I have done a written response. I've taken the time because and written out a long response, and I make it. I don't usually publicize them, but I make it available if people ask me about it and so forth. So,
consider it. Consider getting.
Yeah, I like that idea.
To help
I like
out.
that idea.
So,
yeah.
Well, thanks so much, Lee, for coming over to the house. And,
I've enjoyed it. It's been fun. I love your little studio.
I know. It's so
emphasis
cool.
on little.
Yeah, it's tiny. It's tiny. That was one of the things we were talking about before we got in here. I went through 6 or 7 different iterations of where the desk would be, where the bookshelves would be.
Well, originally, very efficient use of space.
Well, I also had an interior designer friend of mine come and he just looked at everything. He's like, oh yeah, put the desk over there, put the bookshelves there.
Oh, nice.
Everything. It made it super easy.
That's awesome.
So,
well, thanks for what you do. I appreciate you having me, and hope we can come back and talk about the Case for Heaven book when that happens.
Yeah.
It comes out September 14th.
September 14th.
You can pre-order it on Amazon, although I hear that ChristianBook, has a big discount on it right now for pre-orders.
Oh, for pre-orders, CBD.com?
Yeah, which is Christian Book Distributors. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, they're awesome.
Oh.
See, it's like Amazon, except it's all Christian books.
I get everything on Amazon.
I do too, but Amazon's charging full price right now for my book.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not paying full price, so I go to CBD and it's like 30% off or something.
CBD has another meaning too, so don't.
I know it does.
Don't get that mixed up.
I know. Or you just go to ChristianBook.com. I think that's their other.
ChristianBook.com. Yeah. Okay. So I'm waiting for my thing to pop up to actually be able to end this interview. So, but I really appreciate you guys tuning in today. If you've watched all the way up until this point, you probably see value in the stuff that I do. So if you're considering supporting this ministry, patreon.com/capturingchristianity. Links are in the description. Also, make sure to come visit the conference. Visit us in person. It's August 26th to the 28th. It's coming up in just a couple months. It's going to be incredible. Links to that are in the description as well. Subscribe, turn on the bell, do all the YouTube things, and thank you so much. All right, see you guys in the next video.